today I'd like to talk about kind of my research journey, working as an Eikaiwa teacher for about 8 years, all the way through to kind of the present day, and what kind of challenges I faced, how I managed to negotiate them. And so a teacher, again, this is Wacky Dan. I worked for 3 years in a large chain Eikaiwa school, both as an instructor and a manager, kind of middle manager. And then I worked another 5 years in a small family-owned Eikaiwa company where I served for a while as the head teacher and then also as an instructor when I started my MA TESOL. So when I was in this environment, as Thomas previously said, it was very formative. I learned a great deal. I improved a great deal as a result. However, there were also numerous kind of points of conflict that I had to kind of make peace with or challenge within Eikaiwa school. So one example of this would be, for example, native speakerism. And in many Eikaiwa schools, the kind of crass slang of native speakers, particularly Caucasian middle class teachers, they were the teacher product. In many cases, very little focus on teaching ability and more their like typical features, their haircut, whatever. And you can imagine that didn't sit well with me. I was trying to be a professional, so I had to kind of negotiate. And what really helped me was research. So research was, in essence, kind of a bridge between my heart and my brain. My heart knew something was wrong. I didn't have the language, I didn't have the meta terms to kind of categorize what I thought was wrong, but I knew something was wrong, something that I didn't feel served the teachers well, I didn't feel served the students well. So as I started my master's degree at Kanda University of International Studies, this became a bridge to my brain, where I began to learn more about things like critical applied linguistics, things like native speakerism, things like Vygotskian sociocultural theory, etc. And it helped me to kind of put pieces together and orient myself. It was also a way for me to find meaning within my Eikaiwa classes. When I started to learn about all of this critical applied linguistics stuff, there was a danger of me kind of going down a rabbit hole, becoming like overly cynical, thinking, oh, this is just like a host club, this is all pointless. But what doing the MA and doing research helped me to do, just like Mayumi has demonstrated here, and also many of the students in the Nagoya University of Foreign Studies MA, research allowed me to interrogate, analyze, and derive meaning from my practice. So every class I taught in Eikaiwa, it wasn't a host club session anymore. It was action research. It was self-discovery. It was development. So this really helped me to grow and kind of get past that kind of cynicism trap. So the first study I'm going to tell you about is with a student I taught called Haruka in 2019. And this study was based on Haruka's diary. She kept a diary for over a year. And as you can see, 337 diary entries. None of my university students would do this. But this was wholly self-regulated, self-initiated. She took the time, despite being busy, to complete these diary entries in English, which I would then check later. So these became the data for my study. This was kind of a longitudinal study over a year. And I also supplemented this with 2 reflective questionnaires in English and Japanese, which kind of helped her to reflect on the diary writing process more deeply. So a big kind of thing I had to be careful of here was my positionality. I was her teacher, and then simultaneously I was a researcher as well. And Haruka and I had a very, very kind of close relationship. She trusted me. Her passion kept me going as a teacher, which I'm not sure if she knows or not, but it did. So an ethic of care. So within research ethics, we have two kind of branches. We have procedural ethics. So this is like box checking. Did your ethical guidelines pass the committee, right? So that's, of course, very important. We need to get consent. We need to make people confidential or anonymous, etc. But there's also an ethic of care, which I think is important, which is my research done in a kind and thoughtful way? Am I exploiting the person? Whether or not it's formally okay or not, am I treating them with the dignity and respect that they deserve? And Haruka and I are still friends. I'm actually meeting her next week, in 2 weeks, for lunch. And for me, that makes me feel comfortable that I was not exploiting her as a data source. Tom Farrell, the kind of godfather of reflective practice, I love him. He refers to this as like research as a drive-by shooting. Researchers come in, take all the data, bye, and then just abandon everyone. So I don't agree with that. And this is something I had to focus on. The research questions focused on Haruka's motivational factors. How did her motivation ebb and like wane and throughout this time? And also the viability of learner diaries as a research method in Eikaiwa. So what happened? So here's one of Haruka's quotes. So she said, "At first, I think it is important that oneself enjoys studying English. I want to learn English as the life. I don't want to learn English as the study." So this is linked to a distinction within English education in Japan that some of you may be familiar with: eigo versus eikaiwa. Now, eigo is kind of, as Mayumi said, your kind of juken benkyo, studying English for tests, declarative grammar knowledge, etc., rather than language use. Whereas eikaiwa, and we're not talking about eikaiwa schools, the ideology of eikaiwa is more focused on language use, especially with like international interlocutors, and it's more based on like oral proficiency and fun. So this is what Haruka prioritized in her study. This study also emphasized the crucial importance of human connection, very relevant now with AI and everything. In language learning, human connection, human interaction underpinned, I should say, Haruka's whole raison d'etre for doing English study. It also showed that learner diaries can be a really rich source of data. I had fit description. It was wonderful as a qualitative researcher, but also tricky because of the positionality issues. She trusted me, but how was I responding to that trust? Was I being exploitative, etc.? Sorry, I should say there's a link here I will share with everyone later to the paper itself. This was published in the JOUT Learner Development SIG's main journal, the Learner Development Journal. Moving on to the second study, I looked at Tim Murphy's idea of near-peer role models. People who are similar or close to us in some way, like age, cultural background, socioeconomic status, who we look up to as role models. And I wanted to look at near-peer role models as a way of kind of surreptitiously challenging native speaker worship, native speaker norms within Eikaiwa. A problem, as I said before, I had kind of issues with. So what I did is I took videos with, they've all given permission for this, by the way, with two of the Japanese staff members of the Eikaiwa school, and also 2 students who had a lot of experience as English language learners. And I recorded 4 near-peer role model videos with them, talking about their experiences, their beliefs, how they started out, mistakes they had made, really humanizing, really kind of foregrounding a growth mindset, kind of showing that mistakes are not only normal, but necessary, and kind of, showing them to be impressive speakers that do not fit to a very, very narrow native speaker kind of frame. I showed these videos as listening activities in my classes, so they were listening practice activities, and I collected open-ended student reactions on them. So some of the comments I got from students, someone said, it's more important for others to understand you than try to speak like a native speaker. And the proof was in the pudding. I presented them with plausible, impressive examples of English users who looked and had a background like them. Rather than me, them. And these were attainable role models. Not only were they attainable, but the near-peer role models themselves were giving advice on how to get there. And another kind of, I guess, secondary bonus of this was it integrated and empowered multiple stakeholders within the Eikaiwa. Students, but also my colleagues, my Japanese colleagues. I got to put them front and center and show them, you are inspiring people. There's a tendency within the second school I worked in to kind of frame native speakers as the main event, the main course. And the Japanese staff is like, oh yeah, you can just do Eiken prep or something. And I thought that was kind of crap. So through this project, I kind of subverted that in a positive way, so no one could get angry at me. So whether it had a long-term impact or not, I don't know. I hope it did. But for the near-peer role models themselves, they had an experience of being held up as the ideal, rather than someone who looks like me. This was published in Gunma Jout's kind of newsletter, small journal called Speakeasy. And if anyone's interested, I can share that as well. Next slide. So the final study is more akin to what Mayumi was doing. This was a CEA study, which helped me to kind of understand more deeply my role as an instructor in different classes. So I wanted to explore conversational dynamics within communicative tasks between student-student pairs and student-teacher pairs. So sometimes there was an odd number in my classes, like I would have like 3 students and me. So if I wanted to do a pair task, I kind of had to jump in. And we did a picture dictation task because there was a high chance of communication breakdown. It's a very, very challenging task. One person describes a picture, the other person has to draw it. So it's very tough, even for very, very advanced students. So I transcribed the interactions between the student-student pair and the pair that I was with, and then analyzed them with a applied conversational analysis method developed by Chris Hale. He's very active in this area. Okay, so what did I find? So I found that in the student-student group, there was a far richer and more varied use of communicative strategies, like circumlocution, paraphrasing, rephrasing. Like they tried many different things. Some of them were really, really inventive. Like I remember they were describing a chimney, and they, that's a very low frequency word, a chimney. So instead of saying like entotsu or whatever, they would just say, this is where Santa comes. So I thought that was like so creative. And in contrast, in the student-teacher interaction, there was very little strategy use. The student, I would be explaining the picture, and the student would just be largely passive. So it was kind of very much like, or just repeating the word that I said. There was no kind of strategy experimentation at all, or no breakdown repair. Even if I was explaining something quite poorly, and looking back on it, it was quite cringy how bad I was, but the student would not stop me. And I kind of posited that this was at least in part due to a power gap that occurred. For me as a, in inverted commas, native teacher, and again, in inverted commas, non-native student. And up until that point, I had seen my presence in the class in quite a chauvinistic way, really. Like, oh, they're lucky to be working with me because I'm from England or whatever, right? But this study kind of helped me to realize that maybe my presence isn't very positive at all. If I'm trying to encourage students to use varied communicative strategies and like be more active, maybe I shouldn't be getting involved as much. So this actually influenced even my current teaching in university. This was published in a journal called Accents Asia, and if people would like to check this out, you can check the link out later. Okay, so I was doing all this research in Eikaiwa. I did about 6 different studies when I was an Eikaiwa teacher, but it wasn't always smooth for various reasons. So many Eikaiwa schools will be indifferent or even outright, hostile to your efforts. I was doing research on autonomy, and the school I was teaching at, they didn't want autonomous students. They wanted students to be reliant on them. Autonomy and self-regulation was the last thing they wanted. So I had to be very strategic with how I was doing it. I didn't want to get anyone angry. I didn't want to get fired, but, I believed in what I was doing. Also, it's often tough, particularly with the large chain Eikaiwas, to get institutional permission. We'll go into ways around that later. Also, I often felt very isolated because lots of my colleagues, frankly, came to Japan to just kind of play around for a few years and then go home. There were very, very few people who I saw as being like career teachers. So that was tough from a kind of communities of practice perspective. Also, sadly, this isn't just JAUT, but this did happen in JAUT. I've heard from people in our field that Eikaiwa is a lost cause. And even in one case, I'm not a big fan of this person, the students deserve poor teaching because they attend Eikaiwa schools. Now, I have poured a lot of effort in my career into sticking my middle finger up to that opinion. And I believe it's the complete opposite. Eikaiwa students deserve good education, and Eikaiwa teachers deserve respect. Again, this is linked to a broader social issue amongst expats in Japan, particularly online, that Eikaiwa is fast food teaching, like low quality product. So this is all garbage, in my opinion. You and your context are legitimate. Very, very influential academics. I don't know if any of you know Sarah Mercer, one of the top researchers in educational psychology in our field, has done numerous studies on private English schools, both in Europe and I think was it Europe or maybe just Europe? But there are several researchers who really recognize the importance of Eikaiwa, and just through conversations with them as well, and also people from JAUT too, some really heavy duty people, very established researchers, do respect Eikaiwa teaching. Also, this is linked to Thomas's study. This is actually a good link. Eikaiwa, the stereotypes and the issues with teacher identity and teacher image are not restricted to Eikaiwa. They exist within university. They exist within ALTs. They exist within international schools. Eigo and Eikaiwa, commodification of native speakers, sexism, misogyny, these exist everywhere. And in the book I published in 2020, I argued that many teachers use Eikaiwa as a convenient lightning rod to take the pressure off them. Oh, I escaped Eikaiwa. It doesn't happen in my university. Yes, it does, mate. So for me, this is a kind of, how would you say, it's a projection. And very importantly, we need you. We need practitioners and practitioner perspectives in Eikaiwa schools, like Mayumi, like Aya. We need this so we can kind of talk back to these people. So, some options to explore. So, if we look at this from low 2015, the number of JALT journal articles by context, only 3 from Eikaiwa. But so if we look at this at first glance, oh dear, there isn't much Eikaiwa research. But then we can look at it again and say, cool, there isn't much Eikaiwa research. You automatically have your research gap because very few people are writing about this, despite how big an industry it is. So you have an opportunity to make your name and put out some stuff which is going to be like, oh, like they're going to look at this favorably from journals. Like 2 of my Eikaiwa articles were published in Q1 journals. So if no one cares about Eikaiwa, how would that happen, right? So this is an opportunity for you. So if you're having trouble getting approval from an institution, what I did was focus on teacher research, teacher identity, teacher beliefs, because you can just contact the teachers outside of school. It's nothing to do with the school. As long as you don't mention it by name. The students, it's a little bit trickier. Talk to the teachers. Another thing I did was I talked to university teachers who had transitioned from Eikaiwa. So they're completely out of the, out of a race. But listening to their positive and negative perspectives on Eikaiwa can also draw more attention to this industry. Also, use JALT strategically. JALT has so many wonderful options for publishing and presenting. And as I said, lots of people in JALT are really, really hungry for Eikaiwa stuff because we hear so little of it. So I use lots of the JALT SIG journals or the JALT, like I said, Gunma JALT. I use Gunma JALT. It's a really, really beginner-friendly, nurturing environment to publish your early research. And then you get experience and you get confidence, and then, the sky's the limit. Another option for you, if you're having institutional approval trouble, is like critical discourse analysis. Look at Eikaiwa advertisements, look at textbooks, look at PR materials. These are all out in the world, right? Analyze them for like ideology, or like analyze them for like underlying messages. This is another way to kind of take a more critical look at Eikaiwa without needing to go to your boss and beg them for approval. Also, seek community beyond your physical context. So as I said, many of my colleagues weren't really into teaching. They certainly weren't into research. So I was kind of in trouble. Luckily, people in JALT, people in ETJ, people online, people in different podcasts I listened to, I made contact with them online, and I was able to build a web, my own community of practice, which, is still present to this day. Kind of what Mayumi has touched on and what I discussed as well. Doing action research is a way to combine classroom innovation with producing papers. Also, I'm doing a study now on teacher burnout in university. This was funded by a JELT grant. One of our findings, we're just about to submit for review, but one of our findings was one of the main causes of teacher burnout was a lack of meaning. Working hours, yeah, that was a thing, harassment, things like that, that's a thing. But one of the main factors was meaning. So if you can investigate your own practice like Mayumi did and like get a deeper understanding, like she said, she was busy, but she did it and her passion grew. For me, this got me through psychologically or psycho-emotionally, got me through a lot of the challenges of Eikaiwa. And then, as I did in my near-peer role model study, build trust by integrating stakeholders. Get colleagues involved as participants or allow them to read your paper or whatever. But building that trusting relationship, I'm not trying to like mess the school around. I'm doing it to try and improve the quality of my teaching and therefore the satisfaction of their students. So if anyone has any questions, please contact me at any time. This is a book I published in, or I should say an edited book that I collaborated on in 2020 called Teacher Narratives from the Eikaiwa Classroom. And as I said, moving beyond McEnglish. Eikaiwa is not McEnglish. There's a lot of great education going on in Eikaiwa. And I hope if anyone is interested in doing research or anything, or you need some advice or some help, you'll please contact me. And here's my references. Thank you very much.